an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Derry Girls Season 1, Episode 4, in which we have an exchange student named Katya from the Ukraine. She is not here for anybody's nonsense, except James's. I guess she's here for his nonsense, if that's what you want to call it. And this episode has a lot of 90s music in it, and I was really here for this. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha, and thank you to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode, as she has commissioned all of the episodes of Derry Girls before this. This episode, so it starts off with we welcome the children of Chernobyl, and it never occurred to me that this would be a thing, that like having this kind of huge disaster would spark an outreach sort of program, which is what I feel like this is. It's incredible how wrong everybody is about the situation in the Ukraine, because Erin is just going on about how her family probably doesn't even own a camera. Of course, she has no idea what Derry looks like because she doesn't have a television. And it's just really like, unfortunately, one could say that, well, in that time, it makes sense that you wouldn't know what another country was like because there wasn't the internet and yada, yada, yada. But there are still so many people in the United States who think of other countries as being these wastelands, completely bereft of any sort of technology. And it's sort of it's ironic and kind of sad, actually, because we will think this about countries that are doing, in a lot of ways, much better than we are. And it's we're clinging to this ancient sort of Victorian idea of us being the progressive country that is outstripping everyone. We're not anymore. And that hasn't been true for 50 years. We have fallen so far behind on so many things, mainly because of capitalism. And I won't get into that. But we have a hyper-capitalist society in the United States that is even worse than most places. And I just get really I get saddened and amused by remembering my attitude in this manner. I went and, I lived in Guatemala for 3 months, and I had a similar shock when I went there. I was I didn't expect anybody to have, for example, CD players. I wouldn't have been surprised by TV because that feels like something that's old enough and also kind of all you need is that one hookup and then you're done. But to me, a CD player means that you've got to be able to access the CDs and go buy CDs as well. And to me, that kind of consistent contact was unexpected. Of course, you can't just have one CD and listen to it over and over again. But that wasn't the way that it was. Everybody had all kinds of stuff. And I was just oh, really? I was totally ignorant, And at the same time, I remember walking down this street and it was a cobbled brick street, and it was really old. And this woman was leading her donkey down the street and had the donkey, I'll never forget this. It was laden with stuff, but it was zip ties laid across its back. How they have the hooks on the end? And she had backpacks, JanSport backpacks hanging from the hooks. And it was such a weird combo of a donkey, this really old fashioned mode of transport, but then also we're going to have these really modern, and as I'm watching this and thinking, oh, what a weird combo, somebody honks at her to get out of the way, and this Mercedes SUV edged her out of its path and went around her. It was a really beautiful moment in a lot of ways of just this illustration of the different, the tech coming to meet these old ways And then an emphasis on, oh, but there are rich people in this society who can afford the exact things that we have in the United States as well. And what a shock it was after being in this sort of isolated area to see something like a Mercedes SUV, all shiny and, you know, bumping ludicrous and whatever. So yeah, I kind of like, as much as I want to side-eye Erin for her attitude here, I can't even do it without being a complete hypocrite, because I was absolutely like this. Ashleigh says the U.S. actually fell off the list of top 20 developed countries this year. God, you guys, what's happened to us? It's so depressing. It's oh, Ashleigh, don't get me started. I swear to God, I said this on my Facebook the other day, but just like, when I think about the things that I know need to change in order for things to get better, I don't even know where to start. It's like, really, there are so many problems that all feel like an emergency. And I don't know, if you gave me a magic wand and said, you can fix things, what I would even choose first. I really don't, because it's all so terrible. Anyway, so I wanted to mention, like, I know a lot of people are aware in a vague sense of what happened with Chernobyl, but I did want to talk about that for a second, because I think it's a really weird sort of, it's the kind of thing that a lot of people hold up as evidence that nuclear power is a bad idea. And I have to be honest with you guys, I don't have a firm opinion on nuclear power, so I'm not arguing for one or the other sides. But I do know that the way Chernobyl happened was due to a problem with the way that they decided to test their safety systems, and they did it against regulation. Like they set some things in place in an order that they were not supposed to go, and that caused a reaction which caused a steam explosion. And so, like, you know, not that nuclear power, obviously, if somebody making that kind of a small mistake results in that level of fuck up, in that level of damage, then obviously I understand people being reticent about nuclear power, because human error will be present everywhere. So the fact that we need to be that careful to not murder, 150 people, that is a reasonable fear to have. But I also find it interesting that, this was the safety system that they were testing and the method for which they were meant to test it were written down, and these people straight up did not follow it. And that's why so there was written instructions. Can I just say, as somebody who loves rules and who gets very, very frustrated at people who don't know how to follow them or don't know how to even find them, the idea that people cause this kind of disaster because they didn't read or follow the fucking instructions makes me livid. Like, guys, you don't even know. I have a thing right now that I'm struggling with personally. And it's a direct result of the podcast beginning to grow all of a sudden a lot more. I feel like I've reached this sort of point where it's beginning to snowball and speed up a lot. And as a result of that, I get a lot more messages and comments than I used to asking me about things. And I try so hard to be patient, but it's the sort of like the death of a thousand cuts thing. No individual person is being unreasonable, but when there's 100 of them and they're all asking me something that they could find out in 2 seconds if they Googled it, I start to just like go bananas. So the first 3, I'm just, okay. And then when I get the 4th one and then the 5th one and then the 8th one, I start to be like, what is wrong with you? Look it up. And that is the kind of thing that's like not their fault. I know it's me because I'm on the receiving end of all of them and they don't know that. But the information is there for us if we want it. It's always been like, it's some of us have had more privilege in being able to access it than others. But in the age that we live in, many of us are privileged enough to at least have a smartphone. Like, that's a lot of people, even if they are homeless, have a phone because it's one of the few ways that they are able to like search for jobs and check email and be able to follow up on stuff. And so the ability to find this information is a lot more available than it used to be. And the idea that these people had a fucking handbook handed to them with the exact instructions and they didn't fucking do it is just so... Ashleigh saying it was one of those guys who decided he didn't need to read the manual and can figure it out as he went, you know, like IKEA furniture. Ashleigh, it's funny you mention that because I have recently realized that in our household, when Owen and I buy new furniture, I am the one that has to like spearhead putting it together. Because Owen, it's a combination of him not wanting to read the instructions from the outset, but also I think he has a little bit of, I don't even want to say dyslexia. I think that he just has a little bit of a comprehension issue. So he'll read the instructions and he'll just be like, this isn't really making sense to me. Maybe if I start it, I'll be able to figure out what they're trying to tell me to do. Kind of like working backwards. And I have to be the one that's like, this piece is labeled A, this piece is labeled B. Do you see? Like, and he doesn't even think to look for the stickers on things that tell you exactly what part they are and when they are meant to be put into place. And it's like, if somebody has that kind of comprehension issue, here's an idea. Maybe don't put them in charge of a nuclear reactor. That's all I'm saying. So anyway, and the Chernobyl disaster was a really sort of slow-moving thing. I'm going to read this from Wikipedia. During the accident, steam blast effects caused 2 deaths within the facility, one immediately after the explosion, and the other compounded by a lethal dose of radiation. Over the coming days and weeks, 134 servicemen were hospitalized with acute radiation sickness, of which 28 firemen and employees died in the days to months afterwards. Additionally, approximately 14 radiation-induced cancer deaths among this group of 134 hospitalized survivors were to follow within the next 10 years. Among the wider population, an excess of 15 childhood thyroid cancer deaths were documented as of 2011. It will take further time and investigation to definitively determine the elevated relative risk of cancer among the surviving employees, those that were initially hospitalized, and the population at large. So, yeah, it was something that, like, there were some people who died immediately, but a lot of the fallout from it, literally fallout, happened, you know, months, years afterward. And I actually read a really interesting article, and I wish I could remember what publication it was in. I feel like it was in the New York Times. It was a long read. And it was a journalist who went back to Chernobyl. And it was within the last, like, 5 years, I think, or maybe not. Maybe, like, 10 years. But they were observing the way that people live in the shadow of this disaster. And there were some things that were perfectly normal and seemed like they had sort of recovered. And then they would run into things like they would see there was like a deer at one point, and the people that lived there were hunting, and they took down this deer and it had 5 legs. Things like that, where it's just obviously there's something still continuing to like fester. And it was a marked part of the story that none of the people who lived in the area really wanted to talk about it. Like, when he brought up the fact that this was obviously still having an effect on the environment, most of the people in this area were unwilling to acknowledge that and insisted that, no, everything is fine. We've really, really recovered. And as he stayed with them for, I think, like a week, and gradually began to notice that some of them were suffering from really specific health effects that they tried to hide from him. And it was growing more and more clear that this was like definitely still an issue, but for whatever reason, I don't know if it was like personally they just want to be in denial, or if it was because they knew that this person was an American coming in to report and they wanted their country, they wanted to like rep for their country and make things look better than they were. But they were just really like trying to be sort of shady about what they let him see. And, you know, he's a reporter, he's nosy, he's going to find shit out. So Anyway, I just wanted to address all of that because I find Chernobyl and the disaster there, as many people do, sort of fascinating because it's a real like landmark moment for humanity in terms of a totally new energy resource and our handling of it. And, you know, the question of whether or not this is something that, it's not even a question of whether it could happen again. It absolutely could. And that's the problem, is that it absolutely could. And nuclear power is something that is championed by a lot of people as being, in the end, cleaner and safer than many other energy methods. And in a lot of ways, they're right. But then you have the waste that you have to do something with. And if you are able to, like, break it down enough, there's a surprisingly small amount, but nevertheless, you do have it. And the only solution that we have come up with so far is to bury it and bury it real deep in mountains and make sure that it's like as far away from people as possible and just hope that we never encounter any sort of natural disaster or something that causes it all to like bust open. And I really, you know, as somebody who has seen many disaster movies, I can't help but feel like that's not a great thing. But also right now our options are, we're going to, you know, use coal and gas and pour emissions directly into the atmosphere. And is that better? So what I'm saying is we need more wind power and solar power, everybody. I don't really understand. Ashleigh is saying, have you ever read the story of Sadako Sasaki? Obviously a different nuclear event, but America came in and gave free healthcare to all the victims. However, they didn't actually treat them and just observed the effects of the nukes. Oh, that sounds right. God, we are trash, aren't we? The amount of really horrific medical experiments that America has committed on like oppressed and marginalized and at-risk groups of people is absolutely shocking. Like I'm still finding out stuff. I thought I knew a good deal, and there's, you know, there's like the Tuskegee guys, and then there's the women in Puerto Rico who were like, you know, I'm not even going to get into it, but yeah, that does not surprise me. So let's get back to something more cheerful, shall we? Let's talk about these ladies. So we have this like initial camera pass over all of these students that are standing in the front, like they're on display with this banner above their heads. And there is one dude who does have a pretty wide-eyed expression. And it was the kind of like thing that at the time I noticed, and I sort of laughed to myself because I was like, okay, I understand that this dude's probably nervous. I mean, that's a nerve-wracking situation. You're in a new country and you're being like paraded around in front of an audience who are talking about you. And you know that in a language that is not your first language. So it might be difficult for you to even follow what they're saying. So on that hand, I understood that he was, you know, probably very nervous. On the other hand, it was an out of proportion kind of fear that did not seem like it like went with exactly the nervousness that I was imagining. And we find out at the end that this dude accidentally got swept up in this whole thing and hasn't had the balls to say anything to anybody about it. So he just sort of like let it happen and let himself be shuffled along with this group of Ukrainian kids when he is in fact Irish himself. And yeah, so this dude, he's a mess. But I enjoyed this whole opening thing. We've got her aunt who's making change in the collection jar. And then we have Erin's grandpa winking at somebody, and her mother notices. Her mother is holding a baby. Can I just tell you guys, I had no idea that she had like a little brother or whatever this is. I didn't even notice. I don't know if this has come up at all in the episodes before, but she's like holding this baby that I'm just like, where'd that come from? I was really surprised by it. And she is accusing her father of something, and he obviously is being shady and does not enjoy the fact that she noticed this, because this, if she hadn't noticed this one wink, he would have been able to carry on with Maeve for basically as long as he could sustain not making another mistake like this. But as it happens, he is not able to. Oh, okay. Ashleigh says the little sister has been in the high chair in other episodes. Did not even register. It really is like, there are times where I sort of like wonder if I'm okay, because the extent to which I don't notice children is crazy. And I have noticed that in other things as well, in movies and in life, that I won't even register that there's a person because they're a child, and I just don't like, and it's really below a certain age, right? Like, usually if they're able to like walk around on their own, I notice. But if they require care, it's like they're an object, because they are still being like held and carried everywhere. So I don't see them as a person yet. And I just completely, did not even notice. But anyway, so we have the sister giving her speech here, telling the priest to move it along because Rawhide's on soon, which I've never seen Rawhide, but she's got me wanting to because she's great and she likes it. So I feel like I would probably like it. And essentially she's just like, yeah, I know that you guys have a hard time in where you on, but, we're not awesome either. So you're kind of going from the frying pan into the fire, or if not a fire, then another kind of frying pan, a wok at the very least. And then she says, I know it's probably difficult with a sectarian conflict, but there's really only one thing that you need to know. We're the goodies. And welcome to Derry. So that is a hell of an intro. I love the we're the goodies. Like, of course everybody thinks they are, but frankly, as much as I like love the like English village aesthetic, and I want to go and live there in some ways, I did anyway before this Brexit thing, England is like colonizing, oppressing trash. So they're like Americans, in that way. They're slightly better in some ways. They ended slavery before we did. I'll give them that. But, mostly whenever somebody's like, well, the English, I'm like, yeah, you're right. So in that respect, putting aside the religious aspect, probably. But the religious aspect is pretty hard to set aside for me. So we have the walk home, which, it's amazing. We see all these dudes who are standing around with like automatic rifles and friggin' in fatigues. And when we pan back over to Erin, she says to her friend Katya, who I would like to point out is wearing a pentagram around her neck. And I don't know if that's an actual religious thing for her, or if she's just being subversive or what. But I enjoyed that little detail. Katya looks like she's kind of toying with being a goth. Like, she hasn't quite decided if she wants to do it yet, but she's got like a leather collar on and her hair's black and seems very clearly dyed to me. And, the whole thing. And Erin says, it's class, isn't it? About this place that's like, overrun with soldiers and is obviously like on the brink. And Katya says, it's much how I imagine. Oh, because of my letters? Well, descriptive narrative has always been a strong point. No, not your letters. I see on news. And they argue for a few minutes about whether or not they actually have televisions. And Katya in the end is like, yeah, of course we do. What? Which I think is really interesting that, like, I don't think it has occurred to Erin that what's going on in Ireland is big enough to reach other countries that she would consider also troubled. Like, the things that are happening in the Ukraine and what's going on with Chernobyl are obviously going to be news to her, but she has no concept of the fact that what's going on in Ireland might be news to them. And I feel like that's a really, like, great little moment, is her realizing that probably, like, this neighborhood or neighborhoods like it have been featured many times, and she totally knew what she was getting into. So as they head back, they meet up with the other girls and head up to Erin's bedroom. First, Katya wants to just smoke in her room, which of course Erin is like, absolutely not. First of all, not only is that not allowed, but like, I'm pretty sure that if you did that, my mother would literally murder you. There would be homicide happening in here. And of course, Michelle has to show up and say that there's one guy who it turns out is actually Irish that she thinks is a total ride. I love that phrase. It's so filthy and yet so succinct. And wants Katya's help in hooking up with a dude, and gets in Katya's face and speaks really slowly and loudly in this way that people do when they're dealing with someone for whom English is not their first language, even though she just heard this bitch speaking in full sentences in English perfectly fine. So yeah, Michelle, keep it classy. And then we have that wonderful moment with Claire, who's like, you know, well, we come from like pretty, in a lot of ways, if you think about it, we're coming from troubled areas. So we actually have a fair bit in common. And Katya says, I don't really think they're the same. Ours is the result of a terrible accident. Yours is people fighting over some bullshit. Like this, we barely even understand what it's about. And Erin says something about the religious element, and she's like, yeah, but y'all aren't two different religions, are you? You're just different flavors of the same religion. And Claire stops dead and looks horrified and then just blurts out, oh my God, it is stupid. It is so, so stupid. Girl, amen. And I don't mean that in terms of just this conflict. I just mean that in terms of that moment when you are a kid and you start to really think about things that you have sort of taken for granted as part of the scenery your entire life. And then you realize how incredibly fucked up those things are. And you like the whole time never even realized it. Like never even thought to question it. It's not that like you didn't start questioning it on your own. You started questioning it because somebody from the outside asked why. You like the why never even entered your mind until somebody else was like, explain that. And you can't. And then suddenly it's, oh my God, what are we doing? So yeah, Claire, I sympathize. And she starts to go on to this kick about how like, aren't we all just really human beings? And it's like really goofy, but at the same time, like, yes, you know, yes, you're not wrong, Claire. And that's what's so frustrating about movements like this. Like, people talk about SJWs and make fun of like the whole idea of tolerance and whatever, as if being tolerant means that you also have to tolerate like bigotry and hate speech and people advocating genocide. But they talk about it as if it's so corny. And in a lot of ways, it is corny because it's so basic that when you say it, you sound like a child. But that's because it's that basic and we still get it wrong. That's the part that's like, we shouldn't be laughing at the fact that what people want sounds childish. We should be laughing at the fact that what people want is such a base level of fucking decency and we can't even achieve that. And that is embarrassing. We should be embarrassed. So really you turn around and look at it and moments like her being like, we're all just human beings. And it sounds so trite and cliched and meaningless. But in the end, she's right. And it's infuriating, you know? So then we get this weirdness where Katya says to James, you're handsome and also sexy. And then gets up and just starts kissing him. And I really appreciate that the girls are watching this happen and are not sure how to proceed. Because they are, like, first of all, floored at the fact that she finds James attractive, which nobody else does. I think James is a perfectly nice-looking boy with very bad hair that he needs to figure out how to do something with. But I don't, you know, they all talk about how, like, hideous he is. Obviously, he's not, but the fact that they talk about him that way rings very true because there does come a point with the way, you know, like the context in which you know somebody that you completely discount that they are even an option for dating. Like, it's just, they're not even, no. So the way that they are all just baffled at the fact that she finds him attractive, that's the first problem. The second problem is that she just decides not even to, like, gauge whether he's interested or not. She just goes up to him and starts kissing him. And I think it's Aaron who's like, is he enjoying this? And it doesn't look like he is, but also it's sort of like he doesn't really know what reaction to have. Like, it's a combo, I think, of, oh my God, what is happening here? And also, I have not been in this position before. I think he's very inexperienced. And so I do not know what to do now. Like, even if I did like this, I wouldn't really be sure how to proceed here. So yeah, it's just a weird, like, she just is like eating his face, basically. And I think it's Claire who says something like, is this kind of like sexual harassment? Like, what should we, and I think that's a fair question. If it was a dude who was treating a woman this way, it would really be not okay. But because this is like, you know, a totally backward situation from what a lot of us are used to, so they all just pass around some candy and watch. Okay. Ashleigh says sexual harassment-y. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so James, it's he eventually gets on board, but, and because, you know, Katya's attractive. It's not like she's like, you know, she's intimidating. Her constant glower is certainly intimidating, but she's not unattractive. So we go to the family downstairs having dinner, and this is a great fucking I'm going to read this dialogue because I can't get over how perfectly this like whole thing goes down. That I love the dialogue in this show when it's this quick moving and sort of understated. We have, like, you know, don't get me wrong, I love me some Michelle. She has the most over the top lines and personality and way of speaking. So she's really quick, easy comedy, and she's there to, like, really a lot of times move the plot along because everybody else is so timid and cautious that without Michelle, nothing would happen. But then there are scenes like this where it's so much more about, like, this unspoken history. And I love Aaron's Aunt Sarah. Like, she's such a good grown up version of Orla in that she's still, like, spacey and not really with it, but she has more of a grasp on things and, like, as she would need to function as an adult. And yet she still, like, preserves this way of speaking that feels really Orla-like. So you believe her as Orla's mom. So we have Aaron's mother talking to her father, putting him on the spot in front of everybody. He doesn't really know what she's getting at here, but she says something about how, like, she talked to some guy who runs, like, this shop. 2 buns, he says he ordered. And he says, I often do. And she says, an apple turnover and a cream horn. And when she says a cream horn, she's, like, looking down at her plate as she says apple turnover. And then when she says a cream horn, she, like, darts her eyes up at him, like she's waiting for him to deny it. Deny it. Go ahead. Try it. And Sarah stops dead. A cream horn? And even Aaron, that's not like you, Granda. I love it. I love this. Everybody just, like, all it takes is a cream horn for everyone to know something is up. I love it. Sure, you couldn't pay to eat a cream horn. Cream finger it was. Apple turnover and a cream finger. Cream horn, Shay said. And he swore on it, said he saw it being bagged up. And Sarah jumps in. Big Shay has eyes like a hawk, so he does. Oh, my God. He said, Shay said, when you left Duggard's, you took a left up on Pump Street. Pump Street? Who do you know on Pump Street, da? What were you do heading up Pump Street with the cream horn, da? I was visiting a friend of mine. Oh, a friend. A new friend. A male friend, was it? And then there's this long pause, and she basically dances on the table in victory. Cream horns for his fancy woman. What do you think of that? And they are horrified. Erin's mother says, Mom is barely cold in the ground, at which point her husband puts in, your mother died 10 years ago. 10 years! And this man is just supposed to never, ever move on. It's so mean. Like, it's really funny, but it's also mean. And I just, I wish that they would just, he's a human being, guys. And maybe he wouldn't be such a dick to your husband all the time if he had somebody lovely in his life to distract him from being an asshole 100% of the time. Nevertheless, this whole scene, the way that it starts and the reaction that everyone around the table has, and Katya being absolutely baffled by everything. Cream finger, cream horn, who cares? And then her mom, Maeve? Really, Maeve? Is that what, Maeve? That's her name? Why does your mother make that sound? It's just so great. I love this. And this subplot is like painful to watch because Maeve is obviously a lovely woman. She comes by and she is very pleasant and friendly and trying to do her best. And they are cold as ice, except for Sarah admiring her blowout, which is a lovely moment also. And I just feel really bad for Grandpa. And I love, Ashleigh saying, we'll never call you Mammy. Yeah, I love her being like, okay, like, I wasn't aware this was on the table in the first place, but you can take it off again, and that's not a problem. And I also really enjoy her husband going to speak to Granddad and being like, as it's just they, as far as they're concerned, feel like their mother was perfect, and it could be this lovely little touching moment between him and the granddad because he's supporting this guy despite the fact that this dude is a huge asshole to him all the time. He's like on his side, but of course granddad cannot give an inch to this dude and just basically tells him to fuck off. But the episode does end, and I have other plot points to talk about, but the episode does end on him picking up the picture of his wife and looking at it and saying, you were perfect. And it's like such a touching, sweet moment. And I loved it so much. And I was just like, no, I was sitting with Owen watching this one. And we just looked at each other like, just really sweet. So yeah, that's pretty much all I'm going to say about that plot point. But let's go back to the diner or the chips place. And Erin is here sharing her suspicions that there's something else going on with Katya beyond her just being a exchange student. As far as she's concerned, this girl doesn't match up with what her idea of a proper exchange student is, and therefore there must be like an ulterior motive. She cites the fact that Katya thought her letters were boring as evidence of this woman being fake. And also, she fancies James. Don't you find that a bit weird? And Michelle's, that is a bit fucked up in fairness. And the way that she looks at James when she says that. I love James just being a sitting duck. And I feel like this is a really tricky line to walk. Because it can easily cross over from being funny to just being upsetting, if you guys know what I mean. There's, in so many ensembles, there has to be one character that we have all agreed to hate be mean to, make fun of, even though everybody else seems to work together beautifully. And in the one exception, and I don't even know if I would call it really an exception, but it is in terms of its execution, I think it is. Brooklyn Nine-Nine has a couple of detectives that are older men who everybody agrees are just gross and disgusting. And they are often treated like they're used as the butt of jokes for a lot of things. But at the same time, they have each other, at least. And usually with this trope, the person does not have anyone else, at least in the direct location of where the episode tends to take place, that they can count on for backup or to be their friend. So we have in Community, for example, there's Gary Gergich, aka Jerry Gangrich, aka they all don't even know what his real name is because nobody has bothered to actually find out or consistently say the same name over and over again. So part of the joke throughout the seasons is that his name is different every time somebody talks to him, because nobody can keep track of which, and even when he's elected mayor, it's unclear if that's really the correct name that he's using now or not. And everybody just dumps on the guy, and it manages to still be really funny despite the fact that it's basically bullying, but you have to be so careful how you use that sort of thing, right? Or for example, in The Office, and we've got Toby, who there's no reason for Michael to hate Toby the way that he does. And that's part of what's so funny about it, is that Toby is just, kind of a bummer, but doesn't really need to be so despised by everybody. And yet there it is. Ashleigh says, I think if it was less clear that they like him, like when Aaron's following him around trying to protect him from Katya, they really might come off just as bullying poor James. I mean, it absolutely is bullying, though. I think I would say that her protecting James from Katya isn't even evidence that she likes him. It's evidence that Aaron is territorial about who Katya gets to fuck with. And that's something that I feel like a lot of people, will team up when they think that there's a common enemy, even if they don't really like each other. And that's kind of what I think Aaron thinks she's doing there. It's just well, I think we can all agree that Katya is dangerous and bad news. And even though James and I are hardly what I would call friends, he's still one of mine. And so I'm definitely going to come down on his side and protect him from this seductress, kind of thing. So I think it's really interesting how that kind of joking could be something that I find really I think that part of it also is the way that they write James's response to it. Because if you saw him consistently getting upset, saddened, genuinely seeming beat down by it, that would make it a lot less fun. But instead, you see him just being kind of resigned and sort of yeah, okay, sure. Unsurprised and at times straight up baffled, because they will say things they'll be talking about something totally other and take a moment to just turn around and yell at him for nothing and then turn back to their conversation as if that didn't happen. And he's just sort of sitting there how did I get roped into this in the first place? What? And that is also something that happens in Community. Gary Gergich, at one point there's an episode where somebody who is well liked decides that they are going to declare the fact that they like Gary and Gary is their friend. And Gary off to the sidelines whispers, "Don't do this, Ben." He knows of his own standing and he has accepted it, and he does not need anybody else falling on their social sword in order to make him feel better, because it's not going to do any good, and he knows that. And so he would rather just save everybody from this. And that's what I feel like James serves as in some ways. So Katya being into him is a really funny, weird thing. So let's go to the party, because Jenny comes in And she's talking about, she's got one of these dudes who she thinks is an exchange student. And she says something about how he keeps like trying to get away. And one could easily see how that would just be because Jenny's terrible. But we find out later that he's like not supposed to be here. So obviously he's just trying to get home and hoping that he can get, and she's literally got like one of those like those leads that parents use to keep their kids from running off. I know that like it's a common, it's sort of a popular opinion to have that using those sorts of like of leashes for kids is way too much, too over the top, and also displays like a sort of laziness in your parenting. But I have to say that I am unwilling to pass any sort of judgment on that, because I have secondhand just sat and watched women who are trying to wrangle their kids at like a restaurant or getting into the car or, you know, walking through Target. And I cannot fathom how they don't lose their minds. So if tying one kid to you when you have two others to deal with, when you're in a parking lot and that kid just has a tendency to sprint off into fucking traffic, I just can't get mad at that. You know, I feel like if you know this about your kid, then use this tool. And if it keeps your kid from getting killed and you from going nuts, all the better. It's fine. But yeah, so Jenny is planning a party for all of these exchange students. And as we already know from her having a trust fund, Jenny is loaded, so her house is really big. And she has the kid that Aaron has a crush on being the DJ. And I love, he says something about how his band doesn't play covers in this game. You've got to have a little bit of integrity. Oh God, he's so pretentious and I hate him so much. But yeah, this scene where he says that and then she says, "Don't forget the Grease remix." And his look of just resignation. Yeah, okay. And when we go to the party later, I love how this is all set up. Because the camera starts off outside and there are a fair number of people like walking in, and it looks like there's a bunch of people near the door and there's lots of lights flashing. So it looks like it's a really hoppin' party. But then the camera pans around the like 6 people standing right near the windows and door, and you see that it's a huge empty room. Almost nobody is dancing, and this poor DJ kid is bored out of his skull and really just like bummed out. Have you guys been to this party? Because I know I have, and it's the worst. Oh my God. I like, Ashleigh says, "Did Netflix leave in Saturday Night? I know they switched out at least one song in season 1, but Saturday Night is such a bob." I'm not sure which one Saturday Night is. I know they switched out at least one song in season 1. Oh, I'm interested to know why and what that's about. But I'm not sure, like, I'll confess to you guys, I have the same sort of relationship with song titles and, like, bands that I do with actor names, where, like, I'll hear a song and I'll be able to sing the whole thing from beginning to end. It's like recognizing an actor's face. I'll be like, oh yeah, he was in this, he was in this, he was in this. But if you try and tell me, like, well, what band is this? What's the name of this song? I have less than no idea. Like, I will make some really embarrassing wrong guesses before I ever get even close to the truth. So, yeah. The one where the girls say, "It's our song." Oh, you know what? So that was the one song in this episode, Ashleigh, that I didn't know. And I actually said that to Owen, because they start dancing to it and they all know it. And it's like a line dance, kind of like on par with the Macarena, except a little bit more complicated. And I didn't know this song at all. So I'm not sure, honestly, if it was the one that you're saying or not. I was completely unfamiliar with it. But whatever, yeah, that I'm low-key like wanting to learn that dance, because I really enjoy line dances at parties. I think that that's like a surefire way to get things rolling and get people loosened up enough that they're like feeling ready to dance freestyle, for lack of a better word. But this kind of party where there's like a DJ and spinning flashing lights and yet nobody is dancing, it's excruciating. I love to dance. Like, I am always the first one on the dance floor. I am always the last one to leave the dance floor. I am like the party starter in that regard. It's my favorite. And it's always a particular pain to me to see a dance floor not getting used. And I try and get things rolling, and almost always am able to succeed. Almost. By going out on the dance floor myself and inviting other people and or dragging other people. But there have been a time or two where I have gone out there with one other person and it has remained just the two of us for the entire time, and nobody else has joined us. And that is rough. I went to a friend's wedding that was like that a couple years ago. And I was just like, oh God, come on, guys, but nothing. And there was a friend's party that I went to back in Philadelphia. It was a Halloween party. And this bitch, she had her phone attached to this, like, they had a beautiful, good speaker system. And she was playing shit like Imagine Dragons. Nobody's dancing to Imagine Dragons. You know, like, what are you doing? And she wouldn't switch it. She was being like really weird about having control of the music and making bad choices, but she clearly wanted people to be dancing. And I tried to suggest some things to her and she wouldn't listen. And she finally like went off, and I saw her like smoking up in the backyard, which was far enough away that I decided, you know what, fuck it. And I went into her phone I disconnected her phone and put mine in place and opened up a 90s hip hop playlist. And immediately, it was like everybody was just waiting. Everyone else wanted to dance too. And this was not danceable. And they, were just wanting something. And as soon as I started to play some other shit, they all like came on, and I saw her come back in later and she gave me such a dirty look. Like she clearly was so mad about it. And I was just like, how can you even be mad? Like, yeah, I disconnected your phone and I understand you being pissy that I did that, but I did ask you first and you were shitty about it. So, and your party was like failing and that was on you. So I did you a favor and you can't even like, I got so mad. But anyway, so yeah, this like fake out where it looks like the party's hopping and then the camera ducks around. I just found that really, really funny. And meanwhile, Erin this whole evening is positive because she found condoms in Katya's bag. That obviously means that Katya is a prostitute. Like, she isn't even, it's amazing that they are this sheltered, that just having a condom that's the thing. She winds up connecting it to other people coming, like, trying to find Katya to give her money. But it really is a convoluted, weirdo sort of, like, assumption that she is making because she just wants Katya to be guilty of something. Like, she just doesn't like her. That's all it comes down to. So she feels like there has to be something else. And it turns out that all of these, excuse me, all of these other people are trying to give her money because they're going to pool and buy Jenny a present to say thank you for throwing this lovely party for them. So, and it's like this big confrontation that winds up happening on the stairs in front of everybody, where she just like yells that this girl, and Katya is obviously so insulted and horrified by this. And I just really enjoyed Erin being told to leave and like hustling it out of there, because she should, after that point, get out of here. Like, girl, you just fucked up this whole night. Yeah, you really should leave. I appreciated that was how that was handled. So let's go to past that ending, and I'm trying to say, like, Jenny asked her to leave. She leaves in a disgrace. She says something about how she's got 8 bedrooms and a chocolate fountain, Katya does. Because as it turns out, Katya is going to leave off staying in Erin's house and go stay in Jenny's, because now Jenny doesn't have an exchange student anymore. She has, this dude who accidentally got wrapped up in the whole thing. So she's got an empty spot. So Katya's going to go and take that spot. And I really like that Katya winks at Granddad and says, "Good for you. She's hot and you're not dead yet." Oh my God. I love her. And she throws her bag in their dad's hands so that he can take it out to the taxi for her. Like, I love it. "Tell me this. Does Jenny Joyce's house really have 8 bedrooms? Aye, and some of the bedrooms, they have these wee tiny bathrooms attached to them. Imagine." Yeah. It's funny to me that these people who live in this town wouldn't know this about each other already, but I guess it makes sense. I'm not surprised that was a bit of a big deal to someone who's very sheltered. Condoms were illegal in the Republic until the mid-'80s, and even after that, could only be prescribed by your doctor to married couples. Jesus, Mary and Joseph. I'm just like speechless right now. Until the mid-'80s. Oh my God. Oh, and that reminds me of an article that I saw recently in which it turns out that like the break in birth control, you know how you take your pills and then there's like 5 sugar pills or placebo, or at least very low level hormone pills that you're meant to take so that you get your period and then you start the next pack. That break was put in there apparently to make the pills mimic the rhythm method a little bit more reliably and predictably, so that the pill would still be acceptable to the Catholic Church and to the Pope. So that it would be like, yes, this is birth control, but only partially. And then at this point, you're still able to get pregnant. And then you can, so it makes it seem a little bit less like a complete shutdown of the reproductive option. And guys, as somebody who has what is called premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is really bad right around my period, and who goes through horrible hormone fluctuations, I have been prescribed the pill to manage that. I take it as birth control as well, but the hormones are very important to my mental state. And when I found out that that break is not necessary, I almost had a breakdown, because I could have been avoiding so many of my worst depressive symptoms by taking pills straight through and not breaking there. And that break really does fuck me up. It really does. So for the last 2 months, I have been taking my pills straight through, and I am seeing a real downturn in those symptoms. And I'm just so angry that this isn't something that like is commonly known. And no gynecologist that I have gone to has been like, by the way, you could take them straight through. Don't even take that break since you're having, mental health problems surrounding that. Nobody has ever said that to me. In fact, one of the gynecologists that I asked if that was okay to take them straight through was like, well, I mean, you can if there's like a special occasion and you want to skip, but I wouldn't do it all the time. And when I've researched it, like as far as they can tell, there are really no downsides. It's not a problem. So I just, I'm really mad about it. So there's that. But anyway, so yeah, that episode, that was a lot of fun. There was a lot. I really enjoy the way that this show, being set in the 90s, is enough of a nostalgia thing in general that you'd be like, okay, that sounds fun. But I like the way that because of where the show is set and the like storylines that they choose to include makes the time period very important, because it's easy to dismiss the 90s as being near enough to our own era, an era that most of us have like pretty clear memories of. We can be like, oh, well, yeah, I know how it was. I don't need to watch something. but I don't know how it was in Ireland. I have no idea, you know? So like this gives a whole other perspective to it that I really enjoy. So yeah, thank you, Ashleigh, for commissioning this. I'm going to wrap this up, guys, and I'm going to be covering the third episode of season 2 of Deadwood next. So come and join me there if you like, and I will see you soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.